Hey, what is going on, podcast people? Man, it is so great to have you back here once again for another edition of Beyond the Broadcast. Man, it is episode number 7. Man, it's so crazy to think that we're here once again, another Friday. Happy Friday to all of you, by the way. I'm so glad you chose us to end your week on a high note. Man, we have such a fantastic conversation here for you on episode number 7. And just before we get started with our guest and we talk a little bit more about our guest, I just want to ask just a teensy favor from you. If you're listening, if you're watching, or if you just found us randomly on social media, it would mean the absolute world if you followed the podcast, you liked, subscribed, did all the fun social media engagement that you can do, because honestly, all of that gets more eyes on the product, more eyes on this podcast. We get better guests, and it's just a better show overall, and that hopes to support me in whatever I want to make this podcast into. It's already awesome, but it can be even more awesomer. I'm really using that college education to every aspect of my life. But honestly, such a small thing you can do today to really help support the show. Subscribe on YouTube, follow the podcast. Yes, you can follow podcasts wherever you listen to it right now. And leave a review. That's the other big thing too, is leaving a review, 5 stars or 4 stars. Say whatever you want to say. Please just keep it PG. That's all I ask. But man, we got such a great episode here on episode number 7 of Beyond the Broadcast. In my personal opinion, this is one of the best episodes I think we have personally done here on the show. And I think I asked a total of like 7 or 8 questions to this guest. My guest here for today is James Beard. Now, off the top of your head, you might be thinking culinary. Wrong, James Beard. We're talking about the professional wrestling referee, James Beard. Now, that name may not strike an ear, or perk an ear, I should say, to most wrestling fans, but James Beard is a decorated professional wrestling referee, over 40 years in the business, and he's still doing it to this day. He started in the territory days, I believe late 80s, maybe early 90s. So he has been at it for such a long time, and he's been in the ring with people like the Erichs, for example. He's been in the ring with Steve Austin and some of the biggest WWF/WWE stars that you can imagine. He was during the peak of when WWF came to Japan for a lot of their tours in 92. So if you go to SWS, I believe that's the wrestling name off the top of my head, that he worked for in Japan, literally worked for. There's not a lot of American or non-Japanese people that can say they were a full-time ref in a Japanese company back in the day. James has done it all, and of course, we talked to him about his latest venture in life. He was a referee at the Sportatorium, of course, a mock-up of the Sportatorium in the movie The Iron Claw. So, of course, we get into his involvement with the film, what happened, how he helped Zac Efron and all the actors shape their characters. Because, you know, in a lot of ways, he knew a lot of these matches. In a lot of ways, he reffed these matches. So if there's anyone who knew what the Erichs would do or Ric Flair would do, it would be none other than James Beard. So he talks about that, talks about working with Chavo Guerrero Jr. Such a fantastic conversation that we had. He was so gracious to give us an hour plus of his day. We even talk about a match he had with Bruce Pritchard. Yes, it happened. Yes, it's real. I have yet to find any video evidence of it. So James, if you're watching, I still have not found it, but I'm dedicated to find it. I bet you JBL, your best friend, would love to see that stuff too. James and JBL, apparently good friends, talks about that as well. But man, such a great conversation, and I'm so excited for y'all to see this. So, as seen on The Iron Claw, the A24 film, 40-year professional wrestling referee, my friends, this is James Beard. I am so excited to be joined by today's guest. He's someone who I think has done so much in the pro wrestling world, and he might not admit it, but he's a little bit of a movie star. This is Mr. James Beard. James, thank you so much for taking some time out your busy day to be with us here today.
My pleasure, Tyler. Good to be with you.
Man, I tell you what, this is going to be one heck of a cool interview, and I got to ask you because You have done so much in so many places of the pro wrestling world. But I got to ask you, because there's a lot of famous mustaches in the world of professional wrestling. When did you just start growing this mustache of yours?
Well, I actually had a little goatee, my wife kept telling me, she said, "I want you to cut it, and I want you to do the thing here, the Fu Manchu or whatever you call it." And when your wife tells you something, you just do it. It's that simple. I personally, probably not my number one preference, but it is what it is. So I live with it.
It's kind of giving a little bit of Magnum PI, you know what I mean? Jake the Snake Roberts. I like it, man.
Well, good. I mean, it's kind of grown on me, I guess, a little bit after a while, but yeah, I stayed clean shaven for a long, long time, and then you get older, you try to hide as much of this as you can. so I had a goatee for a while, and then she came up with this idea, and what am I going to say? No,
Yeah, exactly. Well, James, yeah. I tell you what, I think there's a lot of wrestling fans that might not know where you've come from. I think their most recognizable part of you was in your role in the Iron Claws. So I want to talk about just your beginnings in pro wrestling. Talk to me, just give me a little synopsis of how you got into the business, man.
Well, I got into the business. I was playing music basically, and around the Dallas area. Got to know a lot of the boys that worked in the business at the Sportatorium, and eventually, the subjects come up. You start talking to them, and I'd watched wrestling all my life, and kind of had a clue, and they just started kind of pushing me toward doing it, and eventually I finally gave in and said, well, I'll see how it feels, and tried it a little bit, and it kind of took, it was just kind of a natural thing for me. I felt real comfortable with it. So, and it wasn't very long before I was just in demand, and I had to make a choice. So it became my life.
Yeah, and from other interviews I've heard you do, it sounds like Bruiser Brody was one of those guys that really got you and kind of threw you into the business. So yeah. How did Bruiser Brody approach you? Did you approach him? What was that conversation kind of like?
No, I didn't approach him. I mean, he was one of those guys that kind of hung around a little bit once in a while, and when you start talking to him, he's a very, very intelligent guy and very insightful, and it just kind of hit it off. And he basically kind of threw me in the water. He just said, "Hey, you're going to do this, and then Bruiser tells you something, you probably ought to try it, So I did. He was very influential to start with. And I worked, some local things and some indie stuff just to get a feel for it. And then the next thing I know, I'm working in Dallas at Sportatorium. So.
Yeah, and I think that's, of course, one of the things we'll talk about when we get into the Iron Claw, the Sportatorium, and how they recreated that. Talk to me about those first few matches. What was it kind of like to kind of get in there and learn the ropes in real time?
Well, it was kind of weird. Honestly, I was never nervous because I'd been fronting a band for years. So I'd been in front of people, so that wasn't a problem. It felt very natural to me from the very beginning. I kind of knew what to do, basically. And of course, there were many, many things that I found out I didn't know as time went by. But, and I tell people all the time, I learned more listening than I ever learned in the ring. And that was one thing that was easy for me because I was a little bit more mature when I started than some guys are. So listening was a big thing for me. I just kind of absorbed everything I could from it. And my goal when I got into the business was not necessarily to always be a referee. It was to be in the creative side of things and be involved in more things other than just in the ring. And of course, eventually that became what happened. But it was, it was a process of learning, but it was also really easy for me to do because it just felt natural.
Yeah. And the one thing I loved that you said on another podcast, and I wish I could remember which one it was because there was two of them I listened to in preparation for this, but you mentioned something about you learned more listening than doing. And I think that's
Yeah.
it carries more weight than inside the squared circle, but that carries weight outside in life. And I think that's just an important lesson for people who in any profession needs to learn.
Oh, absolutely. And this is really a unique profession, a unique business, and there's a lot of little intricate things that you don't really pick up by just watching, and a lot of things that you probably don't pick up by being in the ring because you're so busy trying to just get through the match. So I spent my time, when I was at the Sportatorium, I'd get there early. I'd sit around and talk to whoever happened to be there, and we had a plethora of veterans that would show up. Of course, Skandar Akbar, who became a dear friend, was kind of a mentor, and Johnny Valentine, Red Bastine, and you never knew. I mean, there might be any assortment of veterans that might show up and just kind of sit around and talk, before the matches, and I picked up a lot just by doing that, just by being there. And then of course, eventually, you're riding in the cars with those guys, especially with Akbar, and all those miles, and you just have to learn if you pay attention.
And that's a big thing too about just anything. I have a friend of mine, well, I guess a former boss of mine who, got through high school, did his thing, was in college for a little bit, but the biggest thing that he teaches kids whenever he has the chance, or just young adults, is communication is so key in whatever you do in life, whether you're a mechanic or whether you're a professional wrestling referee. Communication and learning how to be an effective communicator is such an important life skill to learn.
And it's almost a lost art sometimes. I think communication between individuals now is really, strained because so many people are spending so much time on their phones and playing games or whatever they're doing, and social media and that kind of thing. And now I think we lose that art sometimes, and that ability to communicate and understand when you communicate, and wrestling really is all about that. That's what it is. It's about communicating an idea or a feeling. And that's one of the things I think that's lost in wrestling now. You lose that emotional investment in fans because we're not communicating with them. We're just doing things. A lot of matches I see these days it's all action. And they don't really create. They might get a reaction, but they're not really creating that emotional investment in the fans, and that's all about communication.
And I'm glad you jumped ahead a little bit to that because I had just listened to the Wrestling Nostalgia podcast you were just on, and you talked about the lost art of the psychology of matches and the communication right. aspect. When do you think that shifted? Was it the early 90s? When do you think that shift in wrestling really happened?
Yeah, it started to then. The territory started dying off, and a lot of the guys left the business. And a lot of the experienced guys left the business. And, it used to be that coming up in this business, you always work with people who are more experienced, maybe even better than you. And that's how you learned. You learned every aspect of it. So I kind of blame that my generation of guys because we kind of left everything hanging, and there was a whole generation, maybe two generations by now, of guys who came up and just all they knew was what they thought they knew about the business, and some of those guys became trainers, some of them became workers. Promoters, all of that kind of thing, and you still see the effects of it now because they had this vision of how you do this based on just that fan's idea of things instead of a worker, instead of a professional idea of things. And I see that now. I see it in the major promotions. The whole booking aspect of it, the whole creative aspect of it is basically that same thing, and it really is a shame because wrestling in its best sense, as far as I'm concerned, creates that connection with fans and that emotion we talked about. And I don't see that happening now.
It really does. And I think there's a lot of people, at least nowadays, that really think that wrestling is back in the public eye. It's back. It's wrestling is cool again. And it's interesting to hear what you say, because I think some of the gripes that people have, especially with like AEW or New Japan, is it's all these big high flying action, but you don't get that storytelling aspect that you might have gotten during the territory days, late 80s, early 90s.
Yes, I see these guys rating these matches, 5 stars or whatever it is, which is all, it's all an opinion anyway. But basically what it amounts to is when I see the ones that they get all excited about are the ones that generally are the ones that have the most extreme, extreme spots, stunts, that kind of thing. And it's not about that emotional thing, not about telling a story in the ring. You hear a lot of old timers talking about tell that story, develop the story, get the ebb and flow in there. And then that's true. That's one thing that's missing. And then I tell a lot of the young guys that I work with now, if you'll go into one of these promotions and perform your match that way with that in mind, develop the match, bring it up and down, have that emotional connection, it'll stand out because it's different from everything else. And that's really, that's the thing that's missing. And that's why I can't watch a lot of the modern wrestling today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do want to get back in talking about your early days of stuff, because I think when people hear the Sportatorium, especially if they're around my age, they kind of scratch their head and have no clue what you're talking about. So you, if I understand correctly, we're down in Texas in that territory, a lot of really huge names coming from that. So talked about just the territory of Texas, what it was like, and kind of what that experience was like back in the day.
Well, I mean, in those days, it was the territory system was basically you had a promotion that kind of like the home base of a promotion or a home base of a territory, and they would have certain towns that they frequented and booked and went to on a regular basis. And plus, there'd be a lot of little what we call spot shows in between those kinds of things. But you'd usually have a major city like Dallas. And then you have Fort Worth and Austin and San Antonio and and Corpus Christi, Houston, and the guys that was a weekly thing every week. They make that run, which you're working 6 nights a week, 7 nights a week, sometimes twice on one day, at times. So that was the territory system, and everything was homegrown. You had your own heroes, you had your own champions, you had the fans were very intimately and involved in whether they loved or hated this guy or that guy, and it was really a very personal connection for fans. The Texas territory was one. Of course, Texas had like four different ones. They had the Dallas territory, which was those towns, and then out in the Funk territory in Amarillo, there were towns there that actually got out of Texas in some cases. In El Paso, and in San Antonio, eventually Joe Blanchard went down there and started his own, and so every one of those bases had different towns that they kind of covered, and everybody kind of stayed out of everybody else's territory. Just kind of a thing with the promoters. So it was very personal. There's a lot of pride involved. The Texas fans had a lot of pride in world class, or Southwest Sports, which is what it was until they changed the name. But and that was the same. That was true in Georgia or Tennessee or anywhere, that had a territory. So it would. I think the local connection really kind of made it special. And in those days, of course, you had the one, well, it wasn't one world champion, but each organization that kind of covered all these territories had a world champion, and he would travel from one promotion to the next or one territory to the next. It was a kind of a special thing. I think it was a lot more interesting.
Yeah, and you got to see kind of the last efforts of the territories kind of happen. So what were the emotions like in the locker room and within yourself when you kind of knew that the territory days were over and WWE, WCW were really taking over?
It was I think on the business side of it, there was a lot of fear. There were a lot of protection there. Texas was hard to take over for Vince. He came in and tried to, even after Hogan was popular. He came in several times and tried, and it just wasn't kind of going with him because it was a different style. It was kind of Texas has always been a real hard hitting, you can't see through it type style of wrestling. And it was a different thing, for a lot of wrestling fans. They didn't take to it very well. It took them a while. And in fact, I think until Vince convinced Fritz to kind of join in and Kerry to kind of join in, I don't think they really got a stronghold here. So there was a lot of pride in the territories. That was part of that. And there was a time there when you could kind of see the writing on the wall and things were kind of going down, and a lot of the talent was leaving, or the really good talent was getting swallowed up by WWE or ALF at the time, and WCW, whatever, Crockett's promotion. So you could kind of see what was going on, and some of the territories hung on for a little while. Like in Dallas, we had Global, USWA and Global, and then in Memphis, of course, USWA hung on for a lot of years. So there were still some out there that were fighting the fight, but it was a tough fight because of the cable exposure.
Yeah.
And then there was a time when you could see the attendance start to go down, and you kind of see how it was coming, but it was a little depressing. I was a little lucky because a lot during that time frame, I was working in Japan a lot, so I kind of had that to lean on. A lot of guys didn't have that. And then, like I said, they started to scatter. They started to find other jobs because they couldn't work 7 nights a week anymore, and we can make a living in the business. And a lot of them became kind of 2 or 3 night guys, and it was tough. It was a tough thing.
I'm glad you brought up your exposure in Japan, because when I was talking with James Jeffries, he mentioned just the uniqueness that it was of you as an American-born individual going to Japan and being a referee. Talk to me about how that came to be, and I also want to ask you about that first match, that submission match that you had reffed and the difficulties within that.
Yeah, well, it kind of just happened. I had come to know Kendo Nagasaki. Kazu Sakurada is his real name. But Kendo worked in the Texas territory a lot, and he was around, and I'd worked with him quite a bit. And he was one of those guys that it was kind of hard to read because you really didn't know if he liked you or not. He was just kind of. I think some of it was he was never real sure of his English. He could speak pretty good, but I think he was a little insecure about it. So he kind of came across as being a little bit put offish, I guess. But I was around him a lot. I had friends that knew him real well, and we would sit around and talk and that kind of thing. And he usually just sit there and listen, And we were at a match one night, and I was just standing next to him watching what was going on in the ring, and he just looked down at me. He said, "You have passport?" And I went, "Well, yeah." He said, "Well, okay, you go to Japan." That's simple. I thought, okay. I thought that was, I mean, yeah, who's going to say no? Because in those days, going to Japan was a special deal. I mean, you had to be on top of your game, and there'd been referees that go over there do tours and special shows and that kind of thing. So, that's what I was thinking. I'm thinking, I'm going to go over there, and then this deal he had going on, they wanted to make a big deal out of it. It was a two-night thing, and so I'm going over there thinking I'm going over there for 2 nights, but I can say I went to Japan. It's a big deal. So it was that simple. That's how it happened, and going over there and working those 2 nights. That's what I was thinking. I'm thinking I'm going to do this. I'm going to make I think I made $800 or something for 2 nights, and I didn't care. I'd have probably done it for nearly nothing just to go, but it was a big deal. And yeah, you're right. That first match, I thought, I'm going to go over here and work with all the American guys that they're bringing, or they had some guys from Canada and some from Europe, but I thought I'm going to work with all the gaijin, Well, Kabuki, who was one of the bookers, came up to me before the matches. He said, "Okay, you have this match and this match." And the first match was 2 Japanese guys. One of them was Wakamatsu, who was an older guy. This was going to be his retirement match, really. He'd been managing some. He'd been around a long time, well known, and a younger guy. And I said, okay. No, neither one of them could speak English. I said, well, what's finish? All submission. I went, okay, who? I don't know. What? So I go down to the ring, and I've been in the ring with these 2 guys that I don't know. Both can't speak English, and it's a submission match. And and I'm thinking, all I can do is try to make sure it's obvious he's submitting, and that's it. Well, during the match, the younger guy kicked Wakamatsu in the jaw, and it broke it, and he was like hanging down like this. I mean, literally hanging, and I'm like, oh my gosh, and I kept asking him, you give up? No, and I'm like, he'd shake his head, and I'm like, So, okay, so we kept on, and finally Wakamatsu got him in the rear naked, and the younger guy, and then he started submitting, like it's obvious, and I called for the bell, and I evidently did the right thing. It was I'm not sure at the time. So I go back to the dressing room, and Jeff Jarrett, that was his first trip to Japan too, and he said, "What was that?" And I said, "Brother, I don't know. All I know." He said, "Was that for real?" And I said, "Well, you saw his jaw hanging down. That was for real." I said, "Yeah, everything in there was real." So all the boys in the dressing room, all the guys that I was there with, they all got jacked up about that, Fatu and Little Sam, they were ready to kill somebody. And they were excited, but that was my first match, and I got through it, and then I had another match, was a tag match with Bob Orton and Jeff against Kinyu and Kabuki, and that went well. I mean, it was it was a little more traditional, and so I just worked the way I worked at home. I didn't know any other way to do that. And then the second night in the same building, same thing. I got to work a couple of matches that night, and when I went back to the dressing room, the business manager, who's still a dear friend of mine today, he came over to me and said, "Mr. Tanaka wants to see you in the production room." That was the money guy, the main man. I thought, well, what did I do wrong? I walked in there, and he walked up to me and he goes, "Ichiban referee." And I had no clue what he was saying. And he stuck his hand out there and shook my hand, and there was like $500 in this. I didn't know how much it was. I mean, it was nothing in that it amounted to about $500. And I thought, you know, I'll walk back in the dressing room and Bob Orton's laying on the table, taking a nap before his match, like he would do sometimes. And he said, "Well, I think you got over." And I had no idea. Had no idea.
Wow.
And so I go to get paid, and Kabuki's paying us like they do in the $100 bills and that kind of thing. And after I got paid, I thanked him, and he said, "Okay, you come back next month." I went, "Really?" "Oh yeah, you're just you and Japanese boys only." And from then on, I was there. I was part of the company.
Wow.
And as far as I know, I'm the only foreign referee that's ever actually worked for a Japanese wrestling company. I mean, not as part of the crew.
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And what promotion was this once again?
That was SWS.
SWS.
Yeah. It was kind of a breakaway from Kenyu took a bunch of guys from New Japan and Baba and created his own promotion. And eventually they ended up with an agreement with WWF. So I ended up in that situation too, although I was working for the Japanese company, but I was also working with WWF at the same time. So it was kind of cool. It ended up splitting because a lot of the older guys didn't like that agreement. That the original concept of SWS was supposed to be strong style. And I mean real strong style, not what they're calling it today. I'm talking about really, really rugged stuff, and some of the guys weren't happy with that. And they ended up splitting. And when it split, Sakurada took some guys. And of course, I was loyal to him, and I went with him, which turned out good for me because he gave me an opportunity to book and book talent and book the matches and finishes and that kind of thing. And it worked out really well for me. But yep, it was quite an experience. So I worked over there on and off for about 7 years.
Wow. That's incredible. And I think one of the unique things too is you were in Texas and the territories, you're in Japan. Those are two, I don't want to say completely different styles, but very hard-nosed, hard-hitting styles. So even though you never were on the receiving end of any of these things, which wrestlers hit harder, Texas or Japan?
It was very similar. Very similar. And that's one of the reasons I think I felt comfortable, because it would the whole thing over there was is kind of a catch can kind of thing, act and react. And in Texas, that's kind of what we were doing. And you didn't see through things in Texas. You had guys here that were just as I guess tight working, if you want to put it that way, as anybody in the business. And that was just a style here. And plus by then, you in Texas, you had the influence of the Von Erich boys, and you had those guys that kind of you can say what you will, but they really kind of changed the business in a way. They were big guys who could fly around and do things that a lot of big guys weren't doing at the time. So I was getting that kind of thing in Japan too. And it was very comfortable for me because the styles really were very similar. I mean, the languages and some of the customs were very different, but once I got in the ring, it was really cool.
Yeah. And I think some people will look at your thing, because it was when I had found you on Facebook, you had this laundry list of places that you've worked for and people that you've worked for, but you've had the chance to really be in the ring with some true legends of the game. So who are some of those individuals that people today might recognize?
Oh my gosh. I mean, if you're talking about in Texas, I worked with all those names, all the Von Erichs and the Bruiser Brodies and the Abdullah the Butcher and gosh, I mean, everybody you recognize with Texas at some point in time, I've been in the ring with them probably. And in Japan, I mean, I got the opportunity, like I said, I was working with that group that had the agreement with WWF. So I was working with all the top WWF stars too, Randy Savage, Hogan, Rick Martel, Shawn Michaels, you name it. they all came over there, and I got, and it was a really kind of unique situation for me because on a tour like that, it's not like working in the States where you show up at the arena and you do your thing and then you go home. You're living together. You get to know each other. So I had a really special opportunity there to kind of get to know a lot of those guys a lot better than I might have otherwise. And it was really cool, and they brought all their top stars over. So, if you go back to the late 80s, early 90s and start naming all the top guys that were in WWF, I worked with them all just about.
Yeah.
Wow. So, and of course, I go home and work with all those guys. Mm-hmm. And had the opportunity to go to Germany and work over there. And it was just, it's incredible. I've been incredibly blessed as far as that goes.
And talking about, you had the opportunity to kind of get to know these guys on a deep personal level in Japan whenever they come over. Who are some of those guys that you had the opportunity to live with over during those tours?
Well, like I just named some of them. Like Shawn. I was around Shawn because he and Marty were tagging together during that time. And I can remember a night he had already been kind of talking about wanting to go on his own. And there was a night when we had finished, and Shawn and I ended up back in the hotel a little bit earlier than everybody else. So we went and we were drinking a couple of cold ones and just talking. And we talked about that, about what his plans were and how he wanted to, kind of go off on his own, see how that would turn out for him. So I got a little insight there. And then of course, eventually that's exactly what happened. And it's just cool to be able to sit down with guys like that and just kind of just be yourself, and they be themselves. They're not putting on an act or anything. They're just talking, and I know, like Shawn, for example, a lot of guys, later on, he had kind of a reputation of being a little bit of a troubled guy, and a little full of himself. And I'm sure that was true. But my experience with him was totally different. Like Randy Savage, the same thing. Randy came over there. He was unhappy when he got there. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was something about the way he was used in a pay-per-view and probably a payoff. I think that was when Vince was trying to do some other things, and some of the money was going to other things, and he thought that they were getting shorted and that kind of deal. He shows up in Japan. He's really unhappy. And I met him in the hotel, which is what they would do. I'd do a tour and work in the training center. And then when the next tour came, they would take me to the hotel where the guys were coming in, and I'd travel with them. So that's what I was doing. And Randy comes in and we get to talking, and we stayed up till like 6 o'clock that night talking about this, that, and the other. And then he was like, well, if I'm going to be here, I want to make it mean something. So we came up with this angle for him, involved with Tenyu and Haku and Yatsu, and anyway, it was an angle that we came up with, that he and I came up with, and he said, I'm going to take this to the office, and they're going to have to do it. I mean, that's the way it was, and he took it to the office. He told them about it. They loved it, and he insisted that I get credit for it with him. And work it. And so he really was very influential in me getting involved in the creative side of things over there. Because after that, it worked really well. The angle worked really well. And they started coming to me for finishes and ideas and that kind of thing. And of course, when Sakurada broke off, then I was doing a lot of that. So, and that carried over to the States. Because they hear everything you're doing here and there. That's all rumors and stuff. And so Randy had a huge impact on my career, and just in that little short amount of time. And I had such a positive situation with him. And and I know he's known as being one of these guys that goes off the handle sometimes. But with me, it was a totally different deal. And that's what I loved about it, because I had a different kind of relationship with him.
Yeah,
but that's just a couple of examples. But there were a lot of Haku. I mean, I brought him up. I got to tell you, man, he's one of my best friends. still today. And he took me to things and showed me things in the culture over there in Japan that I'd have never had the opportunity to do without him and his influence. And we were very tight. We spent a lot of time together over there. And, everybody talks about this as the baddest man in the business. And to me, he was the most gentle, kindest, sweetest guy I'd ever known, still is. So I just had such a great, unique situation that I really appreciate.
And, it must feel great. Your inner child must be grinning from ear to ear. The fact that you got into the business, you're kind of thrown into the business, but you've had so many experiences over decades and decades of doing this. I mean, your inner child must be so happy that you're doing all this stuff.
It's kind of hard to imagine, that. And I can remember as a kid, I watched wrestling. My folks took me to the Sportatorium a couple of times when I was 8 or 9 years old, and that was my first exposure to live wrestling. And I saw Pepper Gomez and Bull Curry and Red Bastien and Danny McShane and Johnny Valentine, on those trips. And eventually I became friends with a lot of those guys and even worked with some of those guys. And it's just to think about that, as a kid, you do all that and see it and watch it on TV, and you go home and you fantasize about, what if I was involved in that, doing that kind of thing. And I had those fantasies too, just like everybody else does. And then I got off into other things, and I didn't think that would ever happen, but it just kind of came around and happened.
Yeah.
I was telling a guy the other night, we were talking, in fact, John Layfield and I were talking about this one night, and I got to thinking about it. And I don't know how the subject came up and how it got to this, but I was thinking about it. I from the moment that I was kind of thrown into the wrestling business to this day, I have never sought out one single position or one single booking. Never. I've never sought out anything, and it just happened. So it's, I can only explain it like it was meant to be.
Yeah. It was in the stars. You were meant to do it, and you did it.
That's all I can say, and that's not a brag. That's just the way it's worked.
And talking about, all these opportunities you had another one kind of, I don't want to say fall in your lap in a way, but you had one come your way. Of course, I'm talking about the Iron Claw. Mm-hmm. Spectacular movie. It's such what the wrestler did when it did with Mickey Rourke, this movie really has done such a great job telling a story that's in a lot of ways tragic, but in a lot of ways really awesome. I wanted to see how that kind of came to be, because I know that you were taking a little bit of a break from the wrestling business, and then this kind of came to you, and I think you played a really awesome part, not just on screen in the Iron Claw, but also behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, I was still doing a few things, but not much. In fact, I was going. A friend of mine, Dapper Dan from GWF, Danny Davis, has a group of students in Louisiana, and I had been going down there about once a month and working with those guys for him, and just kind of, very green guys, learning, just starting to learn, and I was on my way down there for one of those. This was in 22, sometime early in the year, and Tim Storm gave me a call. Which was not unusual because Tim and I are very, very close. And he said Luke Hawx had called him. And Luke had been involved in a lot of movies and TV shows, doing stunt coordinations and that kind of thing. And he was involved in the casting of the Iron Claw for the wrestling talent. And I hadn't seen Luke in a while, but Tim said he had asked him if I might be interested. Luke thought that having somebody who was actually there, and knew the Von Erichs and the Freebirds and all those guys might be interesting to have involved in the movie. And I said, yeah, tell Luke to call me. And then, like I said, another one of those things that just happened. And so Luke did, and I told him, sure. I said, I'd be more than happy to. And the next thing I know, I'm getting vetted by A24, and which is interesting. I mean, you got to go through all of this stuff, man. They want to make sure you're not some kind of criminal or sex addict or whatever. I don't know what, but you go through all this stuff, to make sure that you're an okay guy. And I went through all of that, did all that, and then I got the call to show up here, and at Baton Rouge is where it was, and so I go down there and walk on set, and I look around, and they've created a little mini version of the Sportatorium, and I thought, oh my gosh, I almost cried. It looked so real, and then I met Shawn Durkin that day and talked to him a little bit, and kind of got an idea of what he wanted from me and what we were doing, and of course, Chavo Guerrero Jr. was coordinating the wrestling, and I'd known Chavo for a while and knew all of his family, worked with all of his family, and we talked a little bit, and he said, I want you to help with these guys, when you've been there, all these guys, if they give them some advice, tell them, this guy would do this thing this way, or walk this way, or talk this way, or whatever. And so they gave me a lot of leeway in doing that. And Shawn Durkin we'd shoot a scene, and he would tell me, call me to the monitor and say, did this look right? And I'm like, there's just this big time director asking me if this looked right. I'm going, yeah, that looks great. And that's one of the things that we took very seriously, to get into the wrestling scenes right. And I think they're the best wrestling scenes I've ever seen in a movie. I really do. And that's not just because I was in it. I really believe that. And they were very realistic the way we did it. So, that process was very interesting. I was down there off and on for a little over a month. And of course, we're sitting here waiting for another year before the movie comes out, and all the rumors and everything. And it was kind of one of those times when you're going like, I just wish this thing would come out. I want to see what it looks like, because I'd get bits and pieces of the script. I didn't really know what the whole story was. I had an idea that it was Kevin's story, and as it turns out, I was pretty close to right. I mean, obviously, there's some historical things in there that aren't 100% accurate. Mm-hmm. Timelines aren't 100% accurate, but it's impossible to do in 2 hours and however many minutes. You can't do it. But I think the story, if you look at it from that perspective, that this is really about Kevin. About how he handled being the older brother and kind of overlooked, and dealing with the family dynamic and all the tragedies, and then also creating a relationship with Pam, all that time. And it was his story. And that's what I told him, because I talked to him about a week ago on the phone. And then we were talking about the movie a little bit, and he said, the only thing that disturbed him a little bit is he thought it was a little harsh about his dad. And it was kind of hard on him. And of course, Fritz wasn't really that. He wasn't really as bad as the movie made him look to be. Sure. But otherwise, and I told him, I said, Kevin, I said, I understand that, and we both know that some of the things in there aren't accurate, but this is your story, and just be happy that they got that story out there, because it was pretty accurate, as far as his emotional state and the things he dealt with and that kind of thing. So I was really proud of it. I got to go to the premiere, walk the it was actually one of the red carpet. It was a green carpet, but that's okay. My wife and my son got to go with me, and they were got to walk it with me, and we got to watch the movie, and I'm sitting there. The first time I saw it at the premiere, it was like so excited about the whole thing. I was just reliving shooting it. And then a couple, when it came out for the public, I got to go see it with a bunch of friends and all. I kind of relaxed and watched it, and it's really a good movie.
Yeah, it really is a fantastic movie. And again, it's not a documentary. It's very much a not really it
Yes.
takes elements from the real story. But the thing that I love, and I know that you don't call yourself a movie star, even though you look fantastic in that movie. You look like an 80s referee through and through. But what was the family reaction like? What was kind of the little ones and everyone's reaction to see you on the silver screen?
Oh, it was a pop. It was a big pop. I've been getting a lot of reaction from friends, and the funny thing about it is that here at home I live close to Tyler, Texas, in East Texas. All those years I was in the business, I was around living out of Dallas mostly, and so a lot of my personal friends and people that I know now and they really don't know the whole history of what I've been involved in. They may know a little bits and pieces and stuff, but not to the extent, And and all of a sudden, I started getting a few of these Hall of Fame things and some accolades and some attention on, and there's a lot of them that are kind of like, I had no idea, and it's just something I didn't go around talking about a lot, and it's kind of out there now, especially with the movie. It's just, everybody knows. It's kind of, but it's been eye opening to me. I can tell you that, but it's been in a good way. It's been.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun. I don't, you're right. I don't consider myself a movie star, but I kid about it. A guy saw, I did an autograph signing last week, and a friend of mine who's actually in the movie business, in New York, he's always, we're kidding back and forth a lot about things, but he said he saw the table I was at, had all these pictures and stuff. And he said, since when do referees get a merch table? And I told him, I said, I'm not a referee anymore. I'm a friggin' movie star.
There you go.
So it's something I kid around about, but I don't take it that seriously. It was fun. I enjoy it. I'm very proud of it. Mm-hmm. And, I would do it again in a minute, I still understand, that I was just a very small part of the whole thing.
But, I think one of the cool things about your aspect of it is that obviously you were able to relive some of these matches that happened, and you knew the mannerisms of some of these wrestlers, and from the sounds of it, the actors who portrayed these people, especially Zac Efron playing Kevin, they really took it to heart to know the mannerisms, how they acted, how they talked, how they walked. Yeah. So talk to me about Zac's development, because obviously he trained with Chavo for the majority of this, but you were really the character builder in a lot of ways. So what was Zac's kind of learning throughout this process of learning who Kevin was and how he was?
Well, it was very easy because I knew Kevin. Kevin and I we used to ride together. I know I've worked with them so many times, the Freebirds and the Von Erichs, and I just I was very familiar with everything they did, how they moved, how they reacted to things. And the real positive situation about it all is that all the actors who were playing the Von Erichs, especially, and Ric Flair and all that, they were so receptive to all those things. They didn't have that movie star attitude that you hear about sometimes. They were all not only willing, but really, really looking for advice, because wrestling was a foreign thing to them. But they did all the spots. I mean, we had guys there showing them how to do it. But when we shot the scenes, they did the spots from start to finish. And you're right, some of those were directly recreated, from history, especially the Freebird things and all that. Zac came to me several times, about, how would he do this, and how would Kevin react to this, and I told him that's the one thing, when we did that one scene where the Freebirds they're outside and kind of rushing the ring, that when we started doing it, kind of going over it and everything, they all kind of stood back waiting for them, and I said, no guys, I said, the Von Erich boys, especially Kevin, he would run right over me to get to him. I'd have to fight him to keep him back. So we those kinds of things, were they just enough to get their real personality involved, and they were just all really willing to listen to that and do it. The last scene I did was the Flair scene, and after it was all over with, I finished and I got out of the ring and I was about to leave, and this was really special for me. I walked around to say goodbye to Sean Durkin and some of the other guys that were there, some of the crew, and Sean told the assistant director to make an announcement on the microphone that was my route, that was it. So she did that, and when she did that, there was a big reaction from the crew and everybody, and I thanked him, and I started to turn around to walk off, and Zach came back out of the back, gave me a big hug and thanked me for helping him. So that was the kind of relationship and attitude they had. It was just a great experience.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything negative about it.
And, it's such a positive light. I mean, obviously it's a tragic story, but this really sheds a really great light, and hopefully there's potential in the future for other families like the Guerreros to get a spotlight on their family, because I think more than anything, yes, it is a movie about wrestling, but it's really a story about a family within wrestling and tells the deeper things. So do you feel like that there's some room in the future for other wrestling stories to be told on the big screen?
Oh, absolutely. And I've heard rumors that there may be some coming up. And I tell people all, from seeing the movie and from my experience in working in it, it's really not a wrestling movie. It's got wrestling in it, and it's about a wrestling family. But the movie is really not about wrestling itself. It's Kevin's story, like I said, like I told him, I said, they got a lot of it right. That part of it, the emotional part and that kind of thing. And I mean, you can nitpick all kinds of stuff in it, I mean, it may look like Kevin, like Pam was chasing Kevin. It was actually the other way around. That was one thing. But and Pam in real life she's an amazing lady. It really is. I was glad they kind of put it over that she kind of held things together, and she really has done that. She really did do that. The little things and details. I mean, he had 2 girls before he had those 2 boys. And that wasn't in the movie. And of course, David had a daughter that was another tragedy. He had a daughter that died at 2 months. From the instant death, infant death syndrome or something like that. I can't. There's a term for it, but 2-month-old. That's another tragedy. And of course, Carrie had 2 girls that I knew well, and they weren't even mentioned in it, so there's a lot of things that you just couldn't cover.
Yeah.
Just couldn't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to ask you, because I think a lot of people who are around my age might not understand some of the matches that you were in or some of the matches that you ref. So if fans are going back and trying to, I guess, go back from this podcast and go and find you in some of those big matches, what are some of those recognizable matches that people might be able to go back and see you reffing?
Oh, wow. It's hard for me to remember all individual matches. There were a lot of stuff in the Sportatorium where, like in cage matches with Kerry and the Freebirds and that kind of thing. There's a lot of that kind of stuff out there. A lot of Japanese stuff is out there. Some matches that I didn't even know were out on YouTube, but they're there. You can find. I think you just Google my name in wrestling, and you'll find a bunch of videos and stuff or whatever. It was really, I had a really weird progression of things when I was working over there at SWS. There was a group, one of the first kind of shoot fight groups was involved in that too. They worked with them, so I got to work some of the matches that ended up leading into what eventually became Pride. And it just kind of work shoots, that kind of thing. So I got to do some of the first of those, and we also had an agreement with AAA. So we were working with some of the top Mexican wrestlers over there. So I just, man, the Rockers, when Shawn and Marty were together, some of those matches were incredible over there. I've seen some of those on video. Just here and there, you can Google my name and find a bunch of stuff. But
I'm sure.
It's hard for me. It's hard for me to just pick out this match and that match, because that's one of the things people ask you, what's your favorite match? Well, gosh, I don't know. Today it might be this one, and tomorrow it might be another one. I may have forgotten of this other one. And a lot of them are matches that weren't even ever televised. One of the best matches I can ever remember being was a New Japan match with when AJ Styles was champion against Steve Anthony, a Louisiana guy. Incredible match, and just it stands out for me, So, and I don't think it was ever even filmed, but it's been an interesting ride, man.
The coolest thing about you, I know that you played a small part in wrestling history, but you're a part of it, and it's really cool to look back to see everything that you've been involved in. But one thing I want to ask you about, because I found this out just recently before we started recording and everything, you've had a few matches with Bruce Pritchard. I want to ask you about those.
Oh my gosh. See? I try to forget some things, and and people bring it up. Yeah. Yeah. That was an Eddie. Oh my gosh. I can't believe it. Eddie Gilbert came up with this idea. He came up to me one day, and he was booking it was a Global. And he said, I want you to stop refereeing for a while, and I've got this angle idea. And Bruce had been down there. He'd left WWF. So that's a long story too. But anyway, he left for a while, and he was working with us as an announcer, and then he started managing some guys, and we started the angle, by him. He was helping some of his guys, and I reached up and pulled his pants down. I was trying to get him down from the ring apron, and inadvertently pulled his pants down, and of course he had this ungodly bikini underwear on, which was a horrible sight, and of course I laughed at him, and everybody else laughed at him, and then eventually his guys jumped me, and Eddie made the save, and then we started all these matches. We did several different matches, and the blow off was you had to pull the other guy's pants down, and Bill Irwin was a special referee. Thank God I won that one, but not thankfully for everybody having to look at Bruce's ass again, but. John Layfield found out about that. I did that Briscoe and Bradshaw podcast way back, and John had found out about that somehow, and of course he's friends with Bruce also, and he was determined he's going to find a tape of it somewhere. I hope he never does.
Oh man, that's so cool. That's so cool. I tell you what, James, this has been, we've gone, I think, everywhere and anywhere with your career, but you're such a great, kind guy to talk to, and I think at the core, you're just such a great storyteller. I mean, I was sitting here just kind of in awe, you talking about all these big names that I've grown up listening about, and just thank you for being just so awesome.
Well, I've been very fortunate. It's been a great run, man. I like I said, I don't even know how it happened. It just happened.
Yeah.
And when I think about not ever really seeking it out in any way, and I still don't. Just things just kind of come around for some reason. I guess it's just what it just meant to be, I guess. But I try to stay involved still, and in some ways I try to pass it on, to some of the younger guys, and if they want to listen, some of them do, some of them don't. And I'm involved with a promotion, and it's called Texas Style Wrestling, and we're trying to promote that style that we talked about, that you can't see through. and that fans can follow and appreciate for the story and the present way it's presented. As something that'll grab you and keep you interested. And so I'm involved with that. I'm helping to book that and writing the format for the tapings and that kind of thing. We got a brand new facility in Forney, Texas that's unbelievable. We get to work with a lot of my good friends, Jazz, Rodney Mack, Tim Storm, people that I know and trust, and I know they think the same way as I do. So we're making a lot of progress with that promotion right now, and I think in the next year or so we're going to really be doing well with it. We got a whole new network called Tex TV that we're on, and that will be on. It's just a brand new streaming network. It's all Texas content, not just wrestling. It's all kinds of different things, but it's all Texas content. So there's a lot of exciting things going on, and I'm still plugging away at it.
And I think that promotion is really coming into a unique point in wrestling, because independent wrestling really has this revitalization coming through, and wrestlers have understood that they can make a real living through independent wrestling. So I'm so excited to see who you kind of get on the show. Can you give us a tease of who you've got coming through the pipeline?
Well, you're talking about talent wise?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, I'm really kind of excited about it in a little ways. We've got a lot of young guys that are just starting to kind of get to that point to where they're really ready for the spotlight, and then a lot of guys are just kind of working their way up to that. Of course, Rodney is still working with us, Tim's still working with us, and everybody knows those guys. We've got our women's champion is Christy James, who's been around a while and does a great job. Misty Marks is a girl that's coming up. She's been trained by Rodney Mack and Jazz, a kid named Soda Pop Hendricks, who's a junior heavyweight. Very exciting wrestler, and very good basic wrestling techniques. Not just jumping around and doing spots. Just really good. Kid named Tino Valentino, who's another one of those like that. I keep thinking of all these guys. AJ Farrat, Frank Stone. We've got a lot of good talent that's coming up that we're starting to have a lot of guys that are contacting us wanting to be a part of it. We've got another Fatu. Zilla Fatu is the youngest one. He's right in line with all these other. He's kind of a little like Jacob, if you've ever watched Jacob. In fact, I saw Jacob about a week ago. So we got a lot of talent around here. And some guys we're bringing in. Kevin Nickel out of Arkansas, who's got some WWF experience. Just a lot of good guys.
Wow.
So I'm excited about it, and that's something we continue to improve, is the talent level.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like it's going to be such a fantastic time when that debuts later here in 2024. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah. You can actually get some of the stuff that we've already taped on streaming right now, but it'll be on that network later on. So
Sure.
Some of the stuff that's out there right now started before I started working with them, but the last 4 or 5 months I've been very involved with writing the format. Jazz and I do most of the booking.
Sure. So was it a lot of just kind of getting this in front of more people? Because obviously, like you said, this was already an established place. So when you kind of came in and started working with a lot of this stuff, was it just getting it out to more people and getting more of that exposure to this place?
I think part my deal was really kind of changing the direction a little bit. Instead of just having matches, they were just doing content, trying to get content in for the streaming deal. Instead of doing that, now we're starting to work angles, storylines, that kind of thing, and which is my forte. That's what I like to do. and we're really starting to connect with some of that right now, and that's what we continue to do and continue to build. That's one of those things I really enjoy. And I think independent wrestling, as long if you do it that way, I think there's a place for a fan base out there that's longing for that kind of presentation, and I've always been determined to try to do that, and I'm that's where I'm headed now, and I hope that this continues to grow, and I believe it will.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, James, I've only got two more questions for you before we let you go.
Okay.
But an hour of your time. Thank you again for just telling your stories.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
I wanted to ask you because I think we're both going to be at the same place here soon. Hall of Fame weekend going up in Waterloo, Iowa. Such an awesome weekend coming up here in July. Why don't you talk to me just a little bit more about that? Because I've heard you in the past interviews that you're so proud of that event and what all goes up there.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. If you hadn't, I would have. That's another one of those things, that just kind of happened. I got to know James Jeffries and Troy Peterson at Cauliflower Alley, I believe it was, is where I first met them, and they invited me up, and this was a few years ago, and so I went up and got to know some of the people involved. Gerald Briscoe, of course, is the head honcho of the Hall of Fame there, and I've known Gerald for quite a while, and he invited me to be a part of it and part of the board, and it's something I've just become a real passion for. It's I think one of the most pleasant weekends I've ever spent. It's kind of an intimate situation. Everything's right there in one place and are close by within 2 or 3 blocks. They have a lot of activities at the Hall of Fame, and this Hall of Fame, by the way, is Dan Gable Museum. And if you know who Dan Gable is, I mean, probably the most famous amateur wrestler ever. And Dan is always there. He's welcome. He's one of the guys that welcome us there, and he's very receptive to the relationship that professional wrestling has with amateur wrestling, which is something that's unusual. It doesn't happen, and yet the highest profile name in amateur wrestling doing that means a lot. So we actually share a wing of that museum that's professional. And for that weekend, we have several activities at the museum, and then we have matches one night. So there's a lot of activities going on, and it's just like I said, it's a real intimate situation. You see a lot of names there, and they're all very very accessible. And it's something that I've just come to really love, and like I said, I'm very passionate about it, and I'm proud of it. We're this coming July, we're loading up for another. This is our 25th anniversary, by the way. Arn Anderson will be there as one of the honorees. Tom Pritchard will be an honoree. Don Fry, amateur honoree, and there's some others I can't talk about right now, but it's going to happen, and then they'll be coming out, in the next few weeks. But it's something that man, I tell you, it's just a wonderful, wonderful organization, and I hope people will want to come. And you can get your tickets right now. Just look it up. It's the Tragus Thez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame at the Dan Gable Museum, National Wrestling Museum.
Yeah, I'm making my plan to get my tickets. I'm planning on being there in July because it sounds like if you're a pro wrestling fan, I mean, you just need to be there.
Oh, you'll love it. You'll love it. There's going to be all kinds of activities. There's some seminars and some question answer things, and I think Gerald has volunteered me for something. I don't know. He always does, and generally at the matches, I'll usually referee at least one match. So I put the gear on for special occasions these days, and that'll be one of them.
That's awesome, man. Well, I'll tell you what, when I'm there, I'm already making my plans to be there. We're going to have to get a picture together because, man, this has just been such a cool conversation.
You bet. You bet. You'll love it.
I'm so excited. Well, I'll tell you what, I got one last question before I let you go here, James.
Okay.
This whole podcast is about going above and beyond in life. And I know for a lot of these things have kind of been fallen on your lap, but you of course had to put in a lot of this work to get to where you are today. So what's one reason why you go above and beyond in life?
Oh, I think a lot of it has to do with knowing that when you are given opportunities, whether you sought them out or whether they just come to you, you have to be prepared to make the best of them. You have to be willing to do the work and put the work in to be the best you can be at whatever that is, and make the best of that situation. And I think that's always been my mindset. I had a real passion for music, and I had some success at that early on. And that kind of carried over to this. I wanted to know everything I can know about wrestling, every detail, everything. And I found out that it's impossible to know everything, but I keep learning. Even after almost 40 years of it, I still learn things. But I think that's what you do. I don't think it's about going over above and beyond. I think it's trying to reach that potential that everybody has, whatever that is. I without sounding, I don't know, without bragging, I guess, I've always felt like I was fairly intelligent and had some skills. And when I apply them in the right place, it usually pans out pretty well. And that's something in this business I've always tried to do. I've always tried to be the best I could be. And, hopefully that's been recognized a few times. And I'm just very fortunate, and it's not something that I believe is a complete act now. I'm still working on it.
Yeah. Wow. James, I tell you what, man, this has been so great. I'm so excited for July to meet you, to see James, to see the amazing event up in Waterloo. And thank you again for just being such a great guest on here.
Oh, my pleasure. Always.
All right. Man, I'm still kind of getting goosebumps that I even did and booked this interview. I started this podcast out. I kind of had an idea, wanted to do some sports people, wanted to talk to people that I knew in certain industries, but I never thought I would get as close to professional wrestling as I did with this interview. James is such a kind and humble Texan. I love it, man. And promise you this one, it will not be the last time that we speak to James. He's got another book out coming up here soon, just before the Hall of Fame weekend up in Waterloo this July. He's got one book out right now, and I'm going to read the thing off my iPhone here. It is The Third Man, My Life and Times Inside the Ring and Out. It's available on Amazon, 4.3 stars. I need to order it and read it before we talk once again. But he says in this second book, he's going to talk a lot more about his time over in Japan. He felt like there were some parts of his career he just left out in the first book. But also, he's going to talk about some NWA stuff. I'm not going to say what quite yet. I want to leave some speculation for this next episode. It's going to be a great conversation when we talk again. Might be for Hall of Fame weekend. He says that he's planning for this book to come out before the Hall of Fame weekend, so I'm going to try to get my hands on it. I'm going to try to read it as quick as I can, and hopefully we can do that interview during the Hall of Fame weekend. It would only make sense, right? I mean, we're both there at the same place. We're there in person. I might as well bring the gear and do our thing. So hopefully watch out for that. I'm hoping to get another interview with James Jeffries as well. I know, kind of hard to keep the two James apart, but oh man, I was fangirling the entire time. I still kind of am. I'm still kind of in shock that it was so easy to kind of get a hold of him and to get this all set up. So man, so happy. He's so active on Facebook as well, so if you want to, shoot him a message, tell him how much you loved the episode, give him some love because, he's just such an awesome person. But James Beard, ladies and gentlemen, such a great guest. Cannot wait to have him on next time on Beyond the Broadcast. Hopefully during the summer is what I'm hoping. Beside from that, next Friday, we're going to try a little something new. So I've got a few guests lined up here coming up in the weeks following this one. We've got a lot of really awesome guests that you're going to enjoy their conversations. But, I'm really excited for next week's episode because we're going to do a solo episode. Not going to be an hour long. I'm not going to take an hour of your time like I do during these sit-down interviews with people. But I'm going to do a solo episode. You and me, maybe ask some questions. But we're going to call these special episodes Beyond the Podcast. So essentially, we're just going into the meat and potatoes of what it takes to make a podcast. Because I know so many people want to make a podcast, but they just don't know where to start, right? Equipment, platforms, social media marketing. I mean, we are going to talk about it all. So I'm going to try to disperse these throughout the times, kind of break up the interview process and all of that kind of stuff, just to try something new. We're in the beginning stages of this podcast, and I'm really excited for it. So watch out. Next Friday, Beyond the Podcast, going live, same time, same place, everywhere. Every single platform you can imagine. Spotify, Apple Podcast. You can listen on YouTube. You can watch all of these on YouTube. And before I let you go, thank you for being here. So gracious that you are here listening or watching to this podcast. And if you can do me just one more favor before we say our goodbyes, just follow us wherever you can. Like, comment, subscribe, follow, whatever buzzword, social media term you want to use. Just please support us. We're doing what we can to get some really awesome guests here on the show, and your support is always appreciated. And of course, leave that review on your preferred podcast platform. All right, podcast peeps, that is my time here for this Friday. Have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy yourselves. And hey, do not forget to go beyond in life. All right, folks, we'll see you next Friday for a special edition of Beyond the Broadcast called Beyond the Podcast. All right, we'll see you then.